Hi everyone, and thank you very much for tuning in today. As we said at the start of the year, we intend in 2022 to help even more students, and we want to give them a lot of tips and guidance, and we want them to have access to extra resources, more knowledge, so they can really achieve their goals in language learning this year. Now, to that effect, I have invited Melissa to join me today. So, Melissa, hello.
Hi, Natalie. It's so good to be here.
Yeah, well, thank you very much for accepting my invitation. So I met Melissa quite a few years ago because both of us were part of a worldwide language professional organization. And we both got on very well, very quickly, because we realized that we had things in common. Melissa is American. She lives in Washington, D.C. She loves France and the French language. And I'm French and I love the United States. I've lived there, I have a friend there, I holiday there. So clearly both of us really hit it off, and we've been business friends ever since. Now, the first thing that I would like to talk about in this interview today is your career path, Melissa, which I think is quite fascinating. So you started as a language learner yourself, in your teens, learning French, and then you became a language coach for English speakers as a second language. And recently, you retrained and qualified as a life coach for language learners. Now, this is clearly the reason why I wanted to interview you today, because I think there's just tons of knowledge and experience and expertise in that could truly help our listeners. But would you like to tell us a little bit about your career path in languages?
Yeah, absolutely. So, right, I did start off learning French as a teenager, and then I went off to college and opted to do a study abroad. And it was during that time I spent a semester in Paris, and I found myself completely out of my element. I had never been out of the country, and here I was trying to communicate in this foreign language. And I felt excited and quite scared at the same time, like most people. And as my time went on through being in Paris in that 4 months, I found myself more intrigued about being immersed in the culture, wanting to speak the language better. And so I continued learning French for many years, going back and forth for vacations. I've also lived with families. I've done immersion programs. But what I found happened for me was I became really fixated on wanting to be fluent and wanting to do everything right and wanting to feel like I fit in. And instead of just enjoying the language, I was really, really hard on myself all the time, always feeling like this just isn't good enough. So throughout that 20-year journey, I also developed quite an empathy for non-native English speakers living in the United States. And so I would volunteer to coach them as much as I can, or lead conversation groups, or just help them assimilate more into American culture. And eventually that turned into me being an ESL teacher. And during that time as an ESL teacher, I noticed that some of the students were struggling with many of the same things that I was struggling with as a French learner, with this idea of it's just not good enough. I don't know enough yet. When am I finally going to be fluent? And I ended up going through my own personal journey, working with a life coach to really address why was this such so important to me, and why did it actually feel painful? Because when it came down to it, it actually felt quite painful for me that personally I wasn't meeting this goal. And so through that work on myself and working with non-native English speakers, I decided to open up a coaching practice where I support language learners who are experiencing many of the same things, who are second guessing themselves all the time and criticizing themselves and just experiencing a lot of self-doubt, to help them move into actually feeling quite comfortable, safe, relaxed, and confident in the language.
That's really, really, really interesting. I'd love to hear a little bit later on about some of the learners you have helped and the barriers they've had and how you help them overcome those. But to start with, I'd love to ask you something that I see very often, and I've now been a language coach for, well, 20 years this year, is that sometimes the more people learn, and the more they actually doubt themselves. So as their language coach, you think they're doing great, and you can see the progress, and it's quite exciting, but you seem more excited than them, because they seem to actually break down a bit and go, oh, I'm still only there. It's a phrase that I've heard so often. I am still only there. And it's like, well, wait a minute. Look at where you started. Look at where you are now. Do you understand how complex the language is? So I just wanted to ask you, is that a common theme of language learners through their journey, feeling that the more they learn, the more they actually have doubt about their ability to use the language?
It was certainly a theme for me in my life. And I would say that it's not a theme for everyone, but for some people, this is a real issue. And I think because this is just a concrete example that confidence and feeling comfortable never comes from the amount of knowledge that you have, but it actually comes from your mindset. And we know that because there are people who have limited abilities in a foreign language, or even in any other knowledge area of their life, yet they still exude confidence. We've probably all met someone and thought, that person knows less than me, and look at how easy things seem for them. Look at how relaxed they are. And that's because mind being confident is not linked to how much they know. So our doubt about ourselves, our doubt about how we speak in a foreign language is created by our thoughts. The thoughts that you have about speaking that foreign language is creating the experience that you have. So if your thoughts are, I'll never get there, people don't understand me, I don't sound good enough, this is so embarrassing. Some things that clients have said to me is, I make it really hard for other people, they just don't understand me. And the thing is, confidence has to be created internally. And that's a personal job for each one of us. We can't expect that learning more of the language will create that confidence. That's one of the biggest lessons that I learned, one of the biggest things that I impart in my clients. The confidence is not going to come from people telling you, oh, you sound really good. Just like you said, Natalie, I tell my students, but look how far you've come. It doesn't change how they feel, though, actually.
I think what you just said, that to me is huge. The fact that your language acquisition and your ability to learn and reuse this language has nothing to do with your mindset and how you feel about yourself. That to me is huge. That's a massive statement. Do you have any little tips that you use with clients to try and ensure that at some point they are a lot more confident? It's really interesting when you say, we know a lot of people who seem so confident and yet don't have that much knowledge. And you see that in business. I see this all the time. I actually was having a conversation about that this morning. We were with Laura, our language coordinator with our French office. We were talking about a company we know, and there's a lot of gaps we feel in the way that they are running the language programs. And we've heard that from many clients, but the way their salespeople talk about it makes you think that they have the answer. Mm-hmm. And actually, a friend of mine worked with them, and she said they make you work on your persona, on your confidence, on presentation skills, not with anything to do with language learning. And I just thought, isn't that interesting? And so is there any little things that you can share with students that could perhaps help them?
Yeah, so I think that you need to get clear on what it is you actually desire from the foreign language. So do you want it to do something for you? So for example, are you doing it because you want it to help you get a job or to make friends or find a spouse, etc.? Because if so, like if you're looking to that language to do something for you, then you won't actually create those things in your life. You have to work on your mindset instead. So really connect with the reason why you learned the language in the first place. What is it that inspired you to learn it? What was your initial motivation? And then what's changed from that time when you first stepped in the classroom and were presumably excited and quite interested in what you were doing and had a lot of motivation? Why are you putting this pressure on yourself? Like really reflect on that journey, because the language that you're learning, it doesn't want you to put that pressure on it.
I know. We should have little stickers for all our students, we've got these like gorgeous little learning diaries that we give students. We should have a little sticker that says just that.
Yes, right.
So that's really, really interesting. I had another question, and again, that is something that we see an awful lot with our learners, and it's the idea and definition of what is fluency. A lot of people will say to me, yeah, my language is okay, but I'm not fluent yet, or I'll never be fluent, or fluency is kind of in 10 years time, and I don't actually think it'd be possible for me. Actually, a lot of people go, I don't want to be fluent, but, and it's like, well, why wouldn't you want to be fluent? And if you do a marathon, I said that to a client the other day. I said, if you do a marathon, you do it because you want to get to the finish line. You may not be in the first 10 runners, but you don't do it thinking, I'm going to get so tired after 5 miles, I'm going to stop anyway and feel like a failure. So why do you embark on this, wonderful language learning journey and already say to me, well, I'll never be fluent, but I mean, if I can get by. And I often have a conversation with our students about how do you actually define fluency? What's fluency to you? Fluency, I think, could be defined so many differently by so many people. I mean, even in our industry, amongst linguists, people don't agree with what fluency actually is. For some people, it's simply the definition of being able to get by in a familiar context and having enough knowledge for what you wanted to learn. You want to move, like you want to move to France, you are not going to work, you're in a little village, you want to be part of the community. Do you know what? You do that with ease, you're fluent. For some of the people, unless you have mastered the language in all its different form and skills, reading, speaking, writing, spoken production, interaction, listening, all of it, then you're not fluent. Do you also have people who kind of beat themselves up by saying, I've been learning for 10 years, I've lived in the country for 5, and I am still not fluent?
Right, for sure. So I've definitely worked with clients who've said to me, I'm not fluent yet. But the interesting thing is, me listening to them as a native English speaker, I consider them fluent just by the ease of which we could communicate, the fact that they could understand the things that I'm talking about. These concepts that I discuss are really high level. If you can understand them, then to me, you're fluent, right? But I think fluency has become this very loaded word. It's this gold standard that people want to achieve, or some people say, well, I don't want it because it just feels scary. And I think part of it is because there's just no one objective way of saying, hey, I've reached it. You know, sure, a test can tell you if you're fluent or not, but that doesn't mean that you feel fluent. Like this is the same thing as with confidence. I think they're so intertwined, where an outside circumstance, a test could say, hey, by all accounts, you're fluent, but that doesn't mean that you feel that way. I think that fluency, each person needs to identify what fluency means to them. And if we focus more on feeling natural and authentic, then that sounds, or that feels a lot better to the clients that I work with, at least. So it's not for everyone. Some people might actually say, you know, fluency for me is I reach this certain level and I pass this particular test, and they actually feel fluent. Other people need to create their own idea of what it is. And for me personally, the idea of the language just being more fluid and being really natural, that to me feels like fluency. And I also think that that's what people really desire anyways, when they say, I want to be fluent.
I agree. I think also there's a lot of kind of outside pressure of when you speak to people. I mean, you know, you've spent some time in France before moving to the UK permanently. I lived in the US, and I felt that my English skills were already pretty good when I was in the US, but I wasn't comfortable in any given situation. You know, I was 18, 19. I hadn't lived long enough yet in order to be there. And I remember that people's reaction to me speaking in English was a huge factor in, one, my confidence, or two, whether I would start to consider myself a fluent speaker or not. Mm-hmm. So I think that, what would you say to people who fear the way that they are being perceived? Do you think there's a reality that sometimes other people can be harsh when you're trying to speak a foreign language? Or is it because people are so underconfident that they think people are judging them for not speaking the language well enough?
Mm-hmm, mm-hmm. Yeah, I think both are realities. Certainly native speakers, there are native speakers who can be harsh on non-native speakers. I've experienced that in France before. And of course, in the United States, we hear stories of immigrants that aren't treated very well, unfortunately. But I also think there's this element of, we believe that other people are judging us. If we're feeling insecure about something, then we are more likely to have the thought, they think I don't speak well enough. They think I should be further along. But in reality, everything that we think others think about us is actually what we think about us. Yeah. So if we remove, they think I'm just not that good, it's actually your insecurity. I think I'm not that good. But we put that out there. I maybe just because it feels like, oh, it's a little bit safer to think that somebody else is thinking that about me.
Because if it's someone else, and it's kind of their prerogative, and it may hurt, but I can't do anything about it. Whereby if it's me doing this, I kind of need to fix myself. Yeah. Right.
Yeah. It's an invitation to really look at what do you really think about your language skills, And how is that affecting the way that you show up? Because if you have these thoughts running through your mind that I'm just not that good, I'm not where I should be yet, that is going to be present in every experience that you have in the language. So it's a wonderful invitation to say, okay, I need to look at myself right now, and why am I feeling this way?
Very interesting. Are you able to give us maybe a couple of examples of language learners that you have helped with your life coaching skills in the last few years, or you know, concrete example that could ring true for the students who are listening to us?
Yeah, for sure. So I worked with one woman who was American living in Spain, and she had been there for many years. And she was avoiding saying any words in Spanish that had a rolling R. Okay. So saying the rolling R could be really challenging for somebody who doesn't have that in their native language. And it was her way of avoiding something that felt painful, because people made fun of her, or at least she perceived it that way, that people made fun of her for how she pronounced her R's. And she also believed that it seemed culturally appropriate in Spain, or the community that she lived in, to point out flaws and like, oh, it's no big deal. That's just how we interact with each other. But it felt very personal to her. And so she had tried doing accent training and just never got anywhere with it. And so during our time together, I said, look, if you can't get an external fix on this, like the rolling R is just not happening, how can you actually embrace that you have this American sounding R? Instead of avoiding the words, instead of not doing the thing that feels painful, how can you actually do it and feel empowered? And one of the things that she had shared through a few sessions is that she would kind of joke about her American R as the pirate R. So like R, like that's how she was doing her R instead of the rolling R. And so what she ended up doing was she started feeling more playful about it. And she went from avoiding saying the R and feeling embarrassed to actually really loving the fact that she had this different sounding R. It was okay if people pointed it out. And she even put she had an eye patch at home. So she even put an eye patch on the doorknob before she left house, so she could remind herself, yeah, it's my pirate R and I love it.
Oh, that's really great.
Yeah. And it really, really helped her change her mindset.
That's wonderful. I mean, it seems like a big challenge and issue to start with. And yet you can literally just change your mindset. And
right.
the same thing seems very little.
Yeah,
really
because it's
incredible.
all about the thoughts. The thoughts that she was telling herself before was how awful she sounded because she couldn't do this rolling R. We changed the thought to something that feels better. Our feelings follow, they change as well. And so we show up differently.
I love it. Can we have one more example?
Yeah, sure. So I also worked with a woman here in the United States who had been living here for about 15 years. By all outside accounts, she seemed very successful. She had been speaking English her entire adult life, so not as a young person, but ever since she had become an adult. And she had many professional jobs where she spoke English on a daily basis. But when we met, she was just constantly comparing her English abilities and her presentation skills to that of her coworkers. And her job actually was to deliver presentations quite often. And something similar that happened with her was that somebody made fun of her accent in a presentation one day. And it was a really painful moment for her, but she held on to that moment for so long. So she kept having this belief that, you know, my accent doesn't sound good, and I'm also just not as good of a presenter as my native speaking colleagues. So again, during our time working together, it was all about shifting the mindset. We had to look at, you know, why was that so painful that somebody pointed out that she said a word differently? Why did she feel so uncomfortable um, presenting in English, and why was she comparing herself to her colleagues? Because that's where all of the answers lie. Once we know why, then we can move into how do we shift that. And so she was able to transform her thinking about all of that. And eventually she felt confident enough to actually share with her boss, look, like when I come to work on Mondays, I spend the whole weekend speaking in Spanish. When I come to work on Mondays, it takes me a little bit longer to get warmed up to speak English. And she started just feeling more comfortable sharing these little bit of vulnerabilities, and seeing that people actually really understood that, you know, gave her some comfort. And so the more confidence she developed, the more people outside of her were asking her to do things. So her boss gave her more responsibilities at work. She got asked by different nonprofits in her local area to be a leader in certain capacities. She enrolled in a certification course to help her advance her career. She, as an artist, she started sharing her art online. And
Wow.
yeah, I mean, it was an incredible transformation. Several months after we were working together, she went to her boss and said, look, I'm ready for something bigger. And I'm looking outside of our organization because there is nothing here for me. And he said, yeah, you're right. We don't have another, a higher level job available for you. And then several weeks later, he came back to her and he said, we're going to create that job for you. We love how you're doing your presentations. We love how you're showing up. We want you to be able to manage the staff and teach them the way that you're actually delivering your presentations. It was a massive transformation for her.
Wow. That's definitely like a wow factor.
Yeah.
It's
Yeah.
it's totally incredible. I've loved speaking to you. This is so interesting. Please, can you tell us where our listeners or viewers can go and find your information if they'd like to get in touch with you?
Yeah, certainly. So you can find me at melissachapmancoaching.com. And you're also welcome to send me an email with any questions at info@Melissa Chapman Coaching.
Brilliant. Well, Melissa, thank you ever so much. I hope that we'll see each other again soon, whether in France or in the United States. But in the meantime, keep doing the amazing work that you're doing, because I think it's just quite phenomenal. Thanks again.
Thank you. Thank you so much. It's been such a pleasure.
Bye.